Good morning, Jane. Welcome to the Belonging Shift podcast. And for everyone listening, my name is Mantej Singh. I'm the host of this Belonging Shift podcast and the founder of Belonging Co., which is a social and cultural inclusion consultancy here in Sydney, where we work with executive leaders to drive the understanding, awareness, and outcomes that build belonging in organizations, both internally, but in the work organizations too. And I'm so glad to have with me here Jane Bringolf, who is the founder of Centre for Universal Design Australia. And we'll hear a bit more about that. Jane is somebody that I've known for some time. We were on an Access Advisory Committee at Sydney Olympic Park together, but Jane, over the years, has spent a lot of time advocating for disability, aging, and broader inclusion outcomes in the sector, in various organizations, but as part of various boards and advisory capacities she works in. But welcome, Jane, to the Belonging Shift podcast. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you, Mantej. It's an honor to be invited to talk about belonging.
So, Jane, let's get going about to learn more about what, across your broad career and long career, what is your advice and wisdom gained around belonging and inclusion that can inspire today's leaders about what works, what doesn't work. Can you tell us a bit about yourselves, who you are, what do you do, and why does a sense of belonging matter to you?
A sense of belonging is everything that universal design is about. Now, I didn't understand that when I first started investigating and becoming involved and interested in the concept of universal design, because when we take the history of universal design, it goes back to things like curb cuts and being able to get wheelchairs across the street, and that was, sort of 1970s, 1980s idea of accessibility. And that then grew into, well, if a wheelchair can get across the street, so can a pram and a shopping trolley and so on. And then that is how the term universal became, because it was seen as good for everybody. Now, that's a very simplistic idea in the beginning, and it's become much more nuanced as the years have gone on. Now, I mean, we're more than 40 years on from that idea. And for me, it is personal because I was born with a cleft palate, which affected my speech. I did have a palate repair. I spent 2 years, I remember, of my school life going to speech therapists. But it wasn't just that. It was being excluded in the schoolyard, being bullied because of the way that I spoke and because I looked a bit different. I was very, very thin at the time. And I can remember all I wanted to do was to be part of the group. I wanted to be invited to the birthday parties, the same as all the other girls. And so for me, I think that understanding of exclusion came very early in my life. And so that's why I think that I became attached to the concept of universal design quite easily, is because instantly I understood that inclusion is one thing, but inclusion really is the route to belonging. That's where it is for me. It begins and ends. It begins with a curb cut and ends with belonging. But belonging is only still part of that, because you can belong to a family, but when you go to the wedding or the funeral or the Christmas party, are you actually welcome? And I think that welcome is another word that we need to introduce into the language of inclusion, belonging. So that's where I'm at in terms of my own experience of wanting to belong and being excluded. I think if you have really experienced that kind of discrimination, and it happened again when I came to Australia, because I came from London. While I had English as my first language, my accent wasn't quite the same as everybody else's. And some people might think that because I was English, that I automatically fitted in. Well, I didn't, because there are so many different cultural aspects of fitting in. So I guess you could say I had a double whammy, but I mean, it also gives me that concept of how when you come to this country, that how hard it is to have that sense of belonging.
Now, thank you, Jane, for sharing that. I think you've talked this interesting journey from welcome to belonging to fitting in. These are very interesting words that have each have their own meaning, and we'll explore that in this podcast. But I think that the interesting thing you are saying also is that, as they say, just because you fit in, you don't necessarily belong. Fitting in and belonging in are different things. And I also think that you're talking about coming from London and not fitting in Australia. And I think in that context also about migrants and refugees who are coming in from countries where they're more oppressed and marginalized. And that's what might they be facing also, in addition to, like, if somebody like you, which is educated, knows what they want to do, coming from UK, which is a developed country, and if you are finding it challenging and you're experiencing that, then it must be multiple other layers for lots of other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't claim to have the same lived experience by any stretch of the imagination. But what I can say is how much accent matters. Because gradually as my accent changed, first of all, people thought I was from New Zealand. Then they thought maybe I was from Perth, and then Adelaide. And then eventually they stopped asking. So, but it is also that thing of how can you belong when someone says, where do you come from? And what they really mean is not, did you come from, Turramurra? They mean, what country did you come from? Because I really like it when people respond who have come from another country and they say, well, I come from Burwood.
Yes. I've certainly been through the experiences myself, and I think, as I say in some of my trainings, it's when you ask that question 5 times in a row, even when somebody's given the answer, you're actually wanting a different answer. You're wanting to sort of almost reinforce what you think, but you want the other person to confirm it. And it's stereotyping in a way, but it also goes into fitting in and belonging, because essentially that puts somebody in a position where they've got to say that they are not from here.
Yeah.
And that's the intention behind it. Okay, so before we go further into it, I guess I wanted for our listeners to understand sort of your professional journey, and if you can talk a bit more about the Center for Universal Design, what does it do, and where it's at currently, because that's an organization you founded, and that's played a pivotal role in championing universal design in Australia. And what are you currently doing? And then we can get it stuck into questions around belonging.
Okay, so the Center for Universal Design began from a conference in 2014 on universal design, and at the end of it, the then Disability and Ageing Commissioner, Susan Ryan, stood up at the end and said, what we need in Australia is a Centre for Universal Design. And before I knew what was happening, I found myself investigating how to do that, how to set it up. And eventually, long story short, we became a legal entity and I started working totally as a volunteer and continued for the next 10 to 12 years working as a volunteer to just sell the message as best I could. And I was using the concept from my Churchill Fellowship, where I met someone who said, if you want something to happen, you have to be everywhere on the issues. And that is what I did. I grabbed every opportunity that I could find to be able to talk about universal design in the context of whoever was asking me, because universal design covers absolutely everything you design. So even these podcasts need to be universally designed. So that's things like captioning and being able to speak in a plain language and have ways in which people can join in. I noticed that you also have a transcript. So all of that is really telling people that they're included, and those are the sorts of things we like to see. What I've seen over time is how much the concept has evolved from just basic access on the street to buildings, and how that might let people in, but it doesn't encourage them to belong and to feel welcome.
Fantastic, Jane. Thank you for sort of giving that sort of background and history. And so what you really advocate for is, it's not just a built environment, it's the environments, physical, virtual, online, digital, products, policies, service, universal design applied universally to everything, basically, is what you're advocating for. And the point you're saying is that if And it goes back into your context of fitting in and belonging, right? That if you design everything universally, then people don't have to fit in. Everybody just belongs, I guess, is the idea behind it. So if you can elaborate that a bit in the context of what's the relationship between universal design and belonging?
Completely underpins it. It's what you aim for. A universal design started as a rights movement. I have the right to have entry. I have the right to be there. But I think universal design has moved past that. Rights are important. I don't dismiss them, and they've done a lot in this space. But the problem with rights is that someone has to give them to you. So it means that someone is withholding them from you, and they decide when you get them. And that is the people who have the rights already are then, in my mind, privileged. And a lot of privileged people do not want to give up that privilege, or they think that by giving people their rights, they will lose some privilege. And that is, I think, the hard part. So the aim of being able to get in the building, to get onto the train, to be able to use the footpath, goes beyond just physical access. It's a bit like if you get to the place and you don't feel welcome and you don't feel like you belong, your time there is going to be very limited. You will only do exactly what you need to do. And if you can avoid doing it altogether, you will. So I think we have to think a lot more broadly than what a lot of access consultants consider is universal access. Now, I just want to say something about universal access, because it's neither universal design and it's not access auditing either. It's trying to put the two things together and make them into one thing. But universal access is always built around what is compliance and what are the standards. And maybe we can tack on a little bit more beyond that. And I think a ramp does not necessarily say I belong. A ramp, in fact, says you are special. You are the others. And, I'm using the real standard stereotypical wheelchair user here in terms of disability. It also says the same thing to anybody who cannot climb steps. So even a parent with a stroller is being told you are not welcome in the same way as anybody else who can walk through the main entry door. So I think it is the essence of what we're trying to achieve in universal design is belonging and feeling welcomed.
I think you said a really good point here, Jane. I really like it because when I look at cultural inclusion also, when I look at how we look at migration, when I look at how we look at sort of things like neurodiversity, organizations, institutions, not necessarily people, but systems are certainly treating this as a special case. I remember 20, 30 years since I've been working in the sector and I started there in India, and there was a term which was commonly used, which was called people with special needs. And so it is like, somebody is giving you access and making you feel special because you are special. But what you're saying is we don't want people to feel special. We just want people to just be people and not actually get attention at all. They should be able to go in, get the same services, experiences without anybody treating them special at all.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that that in one of your other podcasts, this was also alluded to, that special treatment continues to other, and we see that in terms of, one of my things that that people who know me know that I like to be a bit provocative at times, but I think that we should be doing away with special days, like Seniors Week. And, a special day for people with disability, international, they have their place and they have been needed. But I really would like to see a time when we don't perpetuate that othering through having days. We don't need one day a year. We need every day of the year. And, so I think that all this, I feel like it's a real charity hangover from, last century that so these are these poor, unfortunate people over here who aren't like us, whoever us is, and We could guess at that. They are the people who make the rules, and they are the people who say they're the norm, they're the normal. And so one day a year we'll make a fuss of them, and so I find that quite patronising myself. So as a senior myself, and even that word has problems, I'm just older, but you won't see me at any seniors event because just the language is enough to put me off. And it also makes assumptions that I only want to be with older people, and that's not true either. And I can remember my mother making the mistake with me one time, talking about the Paralympics and how it was nice for all those people to be together with each other, like as if they were only wanting to be friends with other people with disabilities, and I was quite sort of, my mother obviously was much older than, a total generation away, but, that I still think there are some hangovers from that.
No, I think, Jane, you've hit the, it's like a universal design belonging jackpot, I guess, in the sense that that's the core of the issue, whether you talk about cultural inclusion or disability inclusion or any other kind of inclusion and belonging area. It's a sense of, people wanting that somebody else has the right to create belonging for you and make you special and make you, it's straight away, it gives away your power. That you don't have the power to do it for yourself. You don't have the right to get it by yourself. Somebody else has to do it for you. And that's the whole concept of othering, right? It's a concept of dominant culture. It's a concept of, as you said, somebody will have to do it for me. And that very fundamental thing is the challenge to belonging that I've worked in the spaces for, and I guess you worked in for a long time, much more than myself. So when you look at your career in universal design and disability inclusion, what shifts are happening? What shifts are happening in this space, in this area of work, that are changing how people are experiencing belonging?
Right. Okay. So how are people experiencing belonging? You mentioned neurodivergence earlier. More recently, I think that that group and that advocacy has done more for belonging in the last 2 or 3 years than perhaps has been achieved by the disability advocacy, people with physical disabilities, the obvious disabilities, the visible disabilities. And I say that because what I've seen is policy work evolving that I didn't see before. And the policy evolution in this regard seems to have alerted the powers that be, the people in power, that there is this group of people who the only way that you can acknowledge and include them for a sense of belonging is to think about ways in which you can include them. And so I think a lot more thinking has gone on because this is much more, because belonging is about the social aspect. I mean, it's one thing to physically get into a building and physically get into a workplace and have what is in the literature called accommodations. But the neurodivergent population has challenged all of that by saying, we want you to consider us as people, not just wheelchair users or people using a cane or a dog or people using listening devices. We don't want it's more than just a special screen on our desk. This is about how you include us in what goes on in the actual fabric of the organisation. And I think that might have flow-on effects for other people with disability. The rights movement has done its work, but if the rights movement had worked fully, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So it needs more than just rights, and it comes down to attitude, it comes down to individuals' understanding. The other side that I'm seeing creeping up is that backlash now that we saw with the women's movement, and that is that we have this far right trying to divide us on racial lines, on cultural lines, on saying things like our Australian values without even saying what Australian values are. And what they mean is their values. They assume that their values are the same as everybody else. So that's the challenge, I think, is for people who think that they have the right way of doing things, and therefore everyone should do it the same as them without having any insights whatsoever that diversity is humanity. That's it. No two humans are exactly the same.
Thanks for that, Jane. So when you look at those shifts and what's happening, because as you say, we're all diverse. Diversity is a fact. Values evolve. Values need to be fair for everyone. And that came up in my episode with Aleem as well. We have this concept of fair go, and fair go is a universal sort of Australian value. But who defines fairness, right? Because if communities evolve, then everybody has to collectively define what fairness means, rather than we sort of carrying on with the notion of fairness that applied to a social context 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. And whose sense of fairness are we applying? So in that context, when you look at leaders and organizations in the context of universal design and belonging, what in your work that you see, what don't executive leaders understand about universal design and belonging? What do they usually get wrong? And then what do you instead want them to be doing?
All right. So I think where some of it is going wrong is that organisations, especially large ones, are still very mechanistic, and you can't treat this as a mechanical kind of tick the box, have a policy, let's tell everybody about the policy, and then it's business as usual. So I think, just using my own experience, I think we're looking more and more now at people who are educated and professional in the workplace, is you have to let them do their job. They are trained to do the job. Let them do the job. If you let them talk about their work, if you let them say what they think should happen, if you actually listen, because that's the key word, isn't it? Listen. You will find out things.
So just to build from that, so what are the top 3 or top 5 belonging shifts you want executive leaders to make so that they can start to doing things from a universal design perspective?
Okay. So I'll just start by making one point, and that is that universal design covers intersectionality. One of the issues that we have is some idea that you have a policy for this and a policy for that, and a policy for disability, a policy for older workers, a policy for migrant workers. You only need one policy for everyone, a universally designed policy. If you are following the concept of universal design and you look it up online, you will discover a thing called the 7 principles of universal design. Please throw them away. Please throw them away. They're not in plain language. They could mean anything. They're used too much as a tick the box, and they are so out of date. This is going back to 1990, right? Please throw them away.
Right. I can see the title of my podcast being thrown away, because I was going to call it Universal Design and Belonging, but you're going to bring it back to that, hopefully.
Yeah. No, I mean, you still have universal design, but the 7 principles that they've served their purpose, but we have moved on. You need to think about the concepts, the words that you would want to use in your value statement. And I think the value statements need to be really clear one-word statements. You don't need whole sentences. You need to bring it back to really sound, plain language. What are your values? Are they profit? Are they caring for staff? Caring for customers, including people so words like inclusion, words like care, words like belonging, words like welcome, words like finding a place, fitting in. You just have to give some time to this. So, and the other one is go where the people are. I was saying earlier to just condense that down is be with the people. Sit at the reception desk. Do the things stand in the kitchen. It's an old phrase which is management by walking around, and understanding that when you walk around, you carry with you as a boss, as a CEO or a senior manager, you carry an aura with you that you don't necessarily feel it, but other people feel it. And to be conscious of that aura, that power that you have, that they recognise, and you need to be able to relax people sufficiently that they will tell you really what you think. And I found kitchen conversations really valuable.
Right. So bring back the kitchens. Is the doorway to universal design and belonging?
Well, everyone belongs in the kitchen, as long as it's accessible.
Yes.
And designed well. Everyone belongs in the kitchen. As one thing about making a cup of coffee is it brings everybody to the same level. But the kitchen, it can be a place where a lot of unseen work can be done. So one other thing is the concept of co-design and co-creation. And I think that what I was describing before with my experience is that I was allowing staff to co-create with me, to co-design how we would do things, how they were more comfortable doing things, and how could I provide that service to them to make that possible. And so what that means is if I understand how they need to work, how they need to feel like they have some ownership of what is going on. Now, ownership in that sense is part of the belonging. You know, if you own it, you belong to it. And so the idea there is to bring people to a point where they feel competent and confident enough to speak up and say what it is that they really need. And I think asking them for their solutions, not what are their problems. And I think one of the issues with co-design is the fear that people will just say, this is a problem, that's a problem. But often people, when they say it's a problem, they've usually thought about the answer as well.
And what if you tokenistically want to listen to stuff and tick a box and say we've done the consultation or we've done the co-design? What if as a leader in an organization, you're not actually prepared to do the things that people would want to achieve universal design? Then what?
You could bring someone in. You can bring someone in to help you do that. Or you can bring someone in to train you to do that, because this is a different skill set. This is about a skill set which makes you feel comfortable about giving away your power for a while. Giving it away.
Letting go of control.
Letting go of control, but also sharing your power. So maybe not giving away your power, but sharing your power. We see this a lot within the community sector. We talk, about working with capabilities. And I think the capability argument here is really a good one in terms of assume people are capable, and they will be in most instances. And there will be people who will say, I'm not going to work with people with disability. I'm not going to work with older people. I'm not interested in working with people who come from this country or this religion or whatever. And you have to then decide, so what is it that you're actually wanting to belong to?
That's a very powerful note to sort of almost finish on. And I just want to ask one quick question. For people who have not heard the word universal design, can you give us a quick definition of what is universal design? If somebody has never approached it, what's the entry point definition of what universal design is and what does it stand for? Because you've asked us to throw the book 7 Principles out. So what's your definition of universal design?
It's considering everyone, everywhere, every time, in everything that you design.
So it's the theory of everything.
Everything, everywhere, all at once.
Fantastic. I think that's a good note to finish on, where I was saying that universal design teaches us to consider everyone, every time, all the time, in everything that we do. Yeah. And if we can do that, we will create a place, a country, an organization where people belong, because they are considered, they are welcome, they are safe. I think that's a very powerful note to finish this on. Thank you, Jane. Thanks very much for your time and for sharing your wisdom of so many years and talking us through your journey as well.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.